The rain hammered against the penthouse glass, sounding like a countdown clock ticking away the final moments of a marriage. Natalie clutched her swollen stomach, the pain tearing through her like a serrated knife, and dialed the one number she thought would save her. But the voice on the other end wasn't a savior. It was a cold, dismissive echo. "I'm in a meeting, Natalie. Deal with it yourself." The line went dead. She didn't know it yet, but that hang-up was the sound of her husband signing away his entire future. By the time the sun rose, a billionaire enemy would be holding her hand, and the father of her twins would be a stranger. This is the story of how Conrad burned his own life to the ground, and how Damien rose from the ashes to save what mattered most. The sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue was silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of a rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a silence that felt expensive, the kind that money bought to keep the noise of the real world at bay. For Natalie, however, the silence was suffocating. She sat on the edge of the velvet chaise lounge, her hand resting protectively over her massive baby bump. 34 weeks. The doctors had warned her that carrying twins was high risk, especially with her blood pressure creeping into dangerous territory over the last month. They had advised bed rest and low stress. Conrad, her husband, and the CEO of Apex Dynamics had nodded at the doctor's words, checking his watch the entire time. "I have the merger with the Japanese tech giants tonight," Conrad said now, adjusting his silk tie in the mirror of their walk-in closet. He didn't look at her. He rarely looked at her these days. He looked through her, as if she were a piece of furniture that had begun to take up too much space. "Do not call me unless the building is on fire, Natalie. This deal is worth $4 billion. It makes or breaks the fiscal year." "Conrad," Natalie whispered, her voice tight. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, a tightness that wasn't just anxiety. "I don't feel right. The Braxton Hicks contractions, they're different today. They hurt." Conrad sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. He sprayed a mist of cologne, sandalwood and cold ambition. "You've been saying that for a week. Dr. Evans said you're fine. You're just anxious because you're bored. Read a book, watch TV. Just let me work." He walked past her without a kiss, without a touch to the stomach that held his son's. He grabbed his briefcase and stopped at the door, turning back not to check on her, but to check his reflection in the hallway mirror. "And if Damien calls, which he won't, because I've already crushed him in the pre-market, don't answer the house line. I don't want that vulture sniffing around my personal life." Damien. The name always made Conrad's jaw clench. Damien was the owner of Ironclad Holdings, Conrad's fiercest rival. They had been friends once, years ago at Wharton, before business and betrayal turned them into enemies. Conrad hated him with a passion that sometimes seemed more intense than any love he had ever felt for Natalie. "I won't answer," Natalie said softly. "Good. I'll be back late. Don't wait up." The heavy oak door clicked shut, locking Natalie inside her golden cage. 2 hours passed. The rain intensified, turning the New York skyline into a blur of grey and charcoal. Natalie tried to read, but the words swam before her eyes. The pain in her lower back was becoming a dull roar, radiating around to her abdomen. It wasn't the tightening she was used to. It was a cramping, twisting agony. She stood up to get a glass of water, and that was when the world tilted. A sharp, blinding headache spiked behind her eyes, and she gasped, gripping the marble countertop of the kitchen island. "This is wrong. This is very wrong." She reached for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she found Conrad's contact. "Ring, ring, ring." "Voicemail," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. She dialed again, and again. On the 4th try, he answered. The background noise was loud, clinking glasses, low laughter, jazz music. He wasn't in a boardroom. He was at a party. "I told you," Conrad's voice hissed, low and angry. "Not to call." "Conrad, please," Natalie gasped, clutching her stomach as a wave of pain nearly buckled her knees. "It's not Braxton Hicks. Something is wrong. My head. I can't see straight. I need you to come home. I need to go to the hospital." "For God's sake, Natalie," Conrad shouted, uncaring of who heard him. "You are embarrassing me. I'm in the middle of a toast with the investors. Stop being so dramatic. Take a Tylenol and go to sleep. If you call me again, I'm turning off my phone. Conrad, I think the babies are—" Click. He hung up. Natalie stared at the phone, the screen blurring as her vision began to tunnel. She felt a warm gush of fluid down her legs. Her water hadn't just broken. There was blood. Panic, cold and primal, seized her. She dialed 911, but her fingers were slippery, and her coordination was failing. She dropped the phone. It clattered across the marble floor, sliding under the heavy kitchen island, just out of reach. She dropped to her hands and knees, sobbing, dragging herself toward it. But the pain seized her again, a vice grip around her torso. Darkness clawed at the edges of her vision. She collapsed onto the cold floor, the silence of the penthouse now deafening, broken only by her ragged breathing. She was going to die here, alone, in a $10 million tomb. Damien sat in the back of his Maybach, watching the rain streak the window. He was parked across the street from the Apex Dynamics headquarters, but his attention was on the tablet in his lap. He wasn't looking at stock prices. He was looking at a live feed from the gala Conrad was currently attending. "He's celebrating early," Damien murmured, his voice a low baritone. He was a man of sharp angles and intense focus, with dark eyes that missed nothing. "He thinks the Japanese deal is locked, sir," his driver, a burly man named Thomas, said from the front. "It is locked," Damien admitted, tossing the tablet aside. "Conrad is a shark. He eats whatever is in the water." Damien rubbed his temples. He had lost the bid, but he wasn't devastated by the business loss. He was more disgusted by the man who won it. He knew Conrad. He knew how he treated people. Damien's eyes drifted up to the penthouse building down the block. Conrad's residence. He knew where Conrad lived because they had bought their properties in the same month, 5 years ago, back when the rivalry was just a friendly competition. "Sir," Thomas said, looking in the rearview mirror, "you have that charity dinner at the Met in 20 minutes. "Turn the car around," Damien said, sighing. "Let's go." As the car began to pull away, Damien glanced one last time at the penthouse balcony. Through the rain and the sheer curtains, he saw movement, a shadow. Someone was on the floor. Damien frowned. He squinted. The lights in the penthouse kitchen were bright, casting a silhouette against the glass door leading to the balcony. It looked like someone dragging themselves. "Stop the car," Damien ordered. "Sir?" "I said stop." Damien opened the door before the car fully halted, stepping into the pouring rain. He looked up. The silhouette had stopped moving. "That's Natalie," Damien whispered. He hadn't seen her in 2 years, not since the wedding he wasn't invited to. But he remembered her. She was kind, intelligent, and far too good for a narcissist like Conrad. "Thomas, call the concierge at the Obsidian Tower. Now," Damien barked, running toward the building entrance. "Tell them there's a medical emergency in the penthouse. Tell them to unlock the elevator." "Sir, we can't just barge in. If I'm wrong, I'll pay the lawsuit. If I'm right, she's dying." Damien didn't wait. He stormed into the lobby, his expensive Italian suit instantly soaked. The concierge, a young man named Leo, looked up in alarm. "Mr. Blackwood, You can't be here. Mr. Conrad gave strict instructions. Conrad is at a party drinking champagne while his pregnant wife is on the floor. Damien roared, his voice echoing off the marble walls. Unlock the elevator, or I will buy this building and fire you before I even reach the top floor. Leo hesitated, saw the terrifying sincerity in Damien's eyes, and swiped his master keycard. The elevator ride took 30 seconds. It felt like a lifetime. When the doors opened directly into the penthouse, the silence was eerie. "Natalie?" Damien called out, stepping into the foyer. No answer. He ran to the kitchen. The sight stopped him cold. Natalie was lying in a pool of water and blood, her skin the color of ash. Her eyes were fluttered shut, her breathing shallow and ragged. "Natalie!" Damien slid across the floor, falling to his knees beside her. He didn't care about the blood ruining his suit. He placed a hand on her cheek. It was burning hot. Her eyes cracked open, unfocused and terrified. "Conrad!" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Help! Babies!" "It's not Conrad," Damien said, his voice surprisingly gentle as he brushed wet hair from her forehead. "It's Damien. I've got you." "He hung up," she gasped, her body convulsing with another contraction. "He said, 'Don't call.'" Damien's jaw tightened so hard his teeth ached. A fury, hotter than anything he had ever felt in a boardroom, ignited in his chest. He hung up. "Thomas is bringing the stretcher," Damien said, scooping her up into his arms. She was heavy with the weight of the twins, but adrenaline gave him strength. "Stay with me, Natalie. Look at me. Don't close your eyes." "The babies," she cried out, clutching his lapel. They stopped moving. "We're going to Mount Sinai. Now." He carried her out of the apartment, leaving the door wide open. He didn't care about security. He cared about the woman in his arms and the 2 lives she was fighting to keep. While Damien's Maybach tore through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, ignoring red lights and speed limits, Conrad was raising a crystal flute of Dom Perignon at the Pierre Hotel. "To the future," Conrad bellowed, flashing his perfect veneered smile at the room full of investors. "To Apex Dynamics dominating the Asian market." Applause erupted. Conrad basked in it. He felt his phone vibrate in his pocket again. He ignored it. Probably Natalie calling back to apologize, or maybe the house staff. He'd deal with it later. Tonight was about him. A young woman in a red dress, his new executive assistant, Tiffany, sidled up to him. "You look tense, Conrad. Is everything okay at home?" Conrad scoffed, taking a sip of champagne. "My wife is having a moment. Pregnancy hormones? She thinks every cramp is a catastrophe." Tiffany giggled, touching his arm. "You're so patient. Most men wouldn't put up with the drama." "I have the patience of a saint," Conrad agreed, completely believing his own lie. Meanwhile, at Mount Sinai Hospital, the scene was chaotic. Damien burst through the ER doors, carrying Natalie. "I need a trauma team. Obgyn, now. She has preeclampsia, possibly placental abruption." Nurses and doctors swarmed them. Damien was separated from her as they transferred her to a gurney. "Who are you?" a doctor shouted over the noise of monitors beeping rapidly. "Are you the husband?" Damien hesitated for a fraction of a second. "I'm the only one who gives a damn," he growled. "But no, I'm not the husband. Get her help!" He watched them wheel her away, her hand reaching out into the empty air, calling for someone who wasn't there. Damien stood in the hallway, his hands shaking, covered in her blood. He pulled out his phone. He had Conrad's personal number. Every rival kept tabs on the other. He dialed. Conrad answered on the second ring, sounding cheerful. "This is Conrad. Make it quick. I'm celebrating." "You son of a bitch," Damien said, his voice deadly calm. The laughter on the other end stopped. "Damien, How did you get this number? If you're calling to beg for a subcontract on the Japan deal, I'm calling from Mount Sinai Hospital. Damien cut him off. Your wife is in emergency surgery. She was dying on your kitchen floor while you were making toasts. There was a pause, a long, static-filled silence. Is she... Conrad's voice lost its edge. Is she okay? I don't know, Damien said. But if she dies, Conrad, I will spend every penny of my fortune to ensure you are charged with negligent homicide. Get here. Now. Damien hung up. He leaned against the sterile white wall and slid down until he hit the floor. He put his head in his bloody hands. He wasn't a religious man, but he prayed. He prayed for Natalie, and he prayed for those 2 boys. Inside the operating room, the monitors were screaming. BP is 200 over 110. She's seizing. Get the babies out, now. We're losing her. The scalpel moved. The world blurred. And in the waiting room, the billionaire enemy sat alone, waiting for news that belonged to another man. The fluorescent lights of the Mount Sinai waiting room hummed with a frequency that seemed designed to induce madness. Damien paced the length of the linoleum floor, his Italian leather shoes leaving faint, bloody footprints that he didn't notice. Every time the double door swung open, his heart hammered against his ribs. But it was never the surgeon. It was a nurse, an orderly, a janitor. It had been 45 minutes since he made the call. When the elevator doors finally slid open to reveal Conrad, the air in the room shifted. It became toxic. Conrad was still wearing his tuxedo, though his bow tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck like a noose. He didn't look frantic. He looked annoyed. He walked with the stride of a man who was inconvenienced, checking his phone as he approached the nurse's station. I'm looking for my wife, Conrad announced, his voice projecting as if he were addressing a boardroom. Natalie Sterling. I was told she was brought here. Damien stopped pacing. He stood perfectly still, watching the man who had destroyed everything Damien held dear, not with business acumen, but with sheer, unadulterated negligence. She's in surgery, Damien said, his voice scraping like gravel. Conrad turned, his eyes narrowing as he took in Damien's appearance. He looked at the ruined suit, the dried blood on Damien's hands, the sheer exhaustion etched into his rival's face. You, Conrad sneered, stepping closer. You have a lot of nerve, Blackwood. Breaking into my home, kidnapping my wife. My lawyers are drafting the restraining order as we speak. If anything happens to her, I'll own your company by morning. Damien didn't flinch. He took a step forward, invading Conrad's personal space until he could smell the stale champagne on his breath. If you had answered your phone, Conrad, I wouldn't be here. If you had gone home when she told you she was in pain, she wouldn't have been lying in a pool of her own blood for 2 hours. Conrad scoffed, brushing an invisible speck of dust from his lapel. Natalie is prone to exaggeration. She has a low pain threshold. She probably slipped. And you, being the opportunist you are, swooped in to play the white knight. It's pathetic, really. You couldn't beat me in the market, so you try to steal my wife. Damien's hand twitched. He wanted to hit him. He wanted to break the jaw that was spewing such filth. But before he could move, the double doors of the surgical unit swung open with a heavy thud. A surgeon stepped out. He was an older man, Dr. Aris Keller, wearing surgical scrubs that were stained dark red. He pulled his mask down, his expression grave. He looked from Damien to Conrad. Who is the husband? Dr. Keller asked. I am, Conrad said, straightening his spine, instantly switching into his CEO role. I want a full report, and I expect the best care. I'm a donor to this hospital. Dr. Keller didn't blink. He didn't look impressed. He looked tired. Mr. Sterling, We did everything we could. The world seemed to stop spinning. The hum of the lights faded into a high-pitched ring in Damien's ears. "What does that mean?" Conrad asked, a frown creasing his forehead. "Be specific." "Your wife suffered a massive placental abruption," Dr. Keller said softly. By the time she arrived, she had lost over 40% of her blood volume. Her clotting factors were depleted. We couldn't stop the bleeding. Conrad stood frozen. "And? She didn't make it, Mr. Sterling. I'm very sorry. Your wife passed away on the table 3 minutes ago." Silence. A terrible, heavy silence that felt like it would crush the walls in. Damien felt his knees give out. He staggered back, catching himself on a row of plastic chairs. He sank down, burying his face in his hands. Gone. Natalie was gone. The woman with the gentle smile, the woman who loved classic literature and hated the rain, was gone because her husband was too busy toasting his own ego. Conrad, however, didn't collapse. He stared at the doctor, his face draining of color, but his eyes were darting back and forth, calculating. "And the children?" Conrad asked. His voice was devoid of emotion. It was a transaction. He had lost one asset. He needed to know the status of the others. Dr. Keller looked disturbed by the question's lack of grief, but he answered professionally. The twins were delivered via emergency C-section before Mrs. Sterling passed. They are alive. "Good," Conrad breathed out, adjusting his cufflinks. "At least there's that." "However," Dr. Keller continued, his tone hardening, "they were deprived of oxygen for a significant amount of time due to the delay in getting Mrs. Sterling to the hospital. They are critically ill. They are in the NICU. We are looking at potential brain bleeds, respiratory failure, and long-term developmental issues. It will be a fight, hour by hour." Conrad's face twisted in distaste. "Brain damage?" "It is a possibility," the doctor admitted. "They are very fragile right now." Conrad looked at the closed doors of the NICU, then back at the doctor. A look of pure revulsion crossed his face. He didn't see sons. He saw liabilities. He saw imperfections. Conrad Sterling did not do imperfect. "I need to make some calls," Conrad said abruptly. "My PR team needs to know how to spin this. The stock opens in 4 hours." "You want to call your PR team?" Damien shouted, shooting up from the chair. "Your wife just died. Your sons are fighting for their lives." Conrad turned on him, his eyes cold and dead as a shark's. "She died because she was weak, Damien. And it sounds like the children are broken too. I have an empire to run. I can't be changing diapers for vegetables. Now, get out of my sight before I have security remove you." Conrad turned his back on the doctor and the grieving man, walking away down the sterile hallway, phone already pressed to his ear. "Tiffany, wake up the legal team. We have a situation. Natalie is dead. Draft a statement. Something about a tragic aneurysm. Make me look devastated." Damien stood trembling in the hallway. He looked at Dr. Keller. "Can I see them?" Damien whispered. "Please." "You're not the father," Dr. Keller said gently. "I know," Damien said, tears finally spilling over his sharp cheekbones. "But right now, I'm the only one who wants them to live." The funeral, 3 days later, was a masterclass in deception. It was held at the St. Jude Cathedral, a Gothic structure of stone and stained glass that cost a fortune to rent. The rain had returned, fittingly, turning the city into a weeping landscape. Conrad stood at the podium, dressed in a black Armani suit that cost more than most people's cars. He looked impeccable. He dabbed at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "Natalie was my light," Conrad recited, reading from a teleprompter hidden in the floral arrangements. "She was the soul of our home. To lose her is to lose a part of myself. I am shattered." Flashbulbs popped. The press ate it up. The tragic billionaire. The grieving widower. The headlines were already written. Damien stood in the back, hidden in the shadows of the choir loft. He wore a dark grey coat, his hands clenched in his pockets. He wasn't there to mourn with the crowd. He had done his mourning in private. He was there to execute a plan. He had visited the NICU every day. He had seen the twins. Tiny, fragile things, hooked up to a maze of tubes and wires. They were fighting. The doctors said they were showing signs of improvement, that the brain scans were looking better than expected. But Conrad hadn't visited. Not once. After the service, the elite of New York gathered at the Sterling estate for the reception. Damien wasn't invited, but he walked right past security. The guards knew better than to stop a man who looked like he was ready to burn the world down. He found Conrad in his study, nursing a glass of scotch. The grieving performance had been dropped the moment the doors closed. Conrad looked bored. "You have some nerve showing up here," Conrad said, not looking up from the documents on his desk. "We need to talk about the boys," Damien said, closing the heavy oak door behind him and locking it. Conrad sighed, leaning back in his leather chair. "Ah, yes. The twins. Dr. Keller calls me every hour. Expenses are mounting. One needs a blood transfusion. We need consent for this procedure. It's exhausting." "They are your sons," Damien said, his voice low. "They are damaged goods," Conrad snapped, slamming his glass down. "Do you know what it looks like for a man like me to have invalid children? It looks like weakness. It looks like genetic failure. I can't have that. I'm thinking of putting them in a state facility upstate. Out of sight, out of mind." Damien felt a chill run through his marrow. He had suspected Conrad was heartless, but this was monstrous. "You would abandon them?" "I'm a busy man, Damien. I don't have time for lost causes. Natalie is gone. Those things, they are just a reminder of a bad investment." Damien reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek, black digital recorder. He placed it on the desk. "What is that?" Conrad asked, eyeing it suspiciously. "That," Damien said, "is a recording of the 911 call Natalie made, the one where the operator hears her begging you to come home and hears you screaming at her to stop being dramatic before you hung up. I also have the logs from your service provider proving you blocked her number 10 minutes later." Conrad's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" "I have resources, I have money, and unlike you, I have motivation." Damien leaned over the desk, his hands planted firmly on the mahogany. "If I release this to the press, the narrative changes. You aren't the grieving widower anymore. You're the monster who let his pregnant wife die so he could drink champagne. Your stock will plummet. The board will fire you. You will be a pariah." Conrad swallowed hard. He knew Damien was right. The public loved a tragedy, but they hated a villain. "What do you want?" Conrad hissed. "Money? A merger?" "I want the boys," Damien said. Conrad blinked. "What?" "I want full legal custody of the twins. I want you to sign away your parental rights. Completely. Irrevocably. You will never see them again. You will never claim them. As far as the world is concerned, they died in childbirth with their mother." Conrad stared at him, his mind racing. He looked at the recorder, then at Damien. A slow, twisted smile spread across his face. "You want to take my burdens?" Conrad laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You want to raise 2 cripples? You want to spend your fortune on medical bills and therapy for children who aren't even yours?" "They are Natalie's children," Damien said firmly, "and that makes them worth more than your entire company." Conrad opened a drawer and pulled out a pen. "Where do I sign?" It took an hour for the lawyers, who Damien had waiting in the car, to draw up the papers. It was a closed adoption, sealed by NDAs so tight they suffocated. The twins, Liam and Noah Sterling, are now legally the wards of Damien Blackwood, the lawyer announced, stamping the document. Change their last name, Damien said, picking up the papers. They are Blackwoods now. They have no father named Sterling. Conrad swirled his scotch, looking at the rain against the window. Good luck with them, Damien. You're going to need it. You just bought yourself a lifetime of misery. I bought a family, Damien said, turning to leave. Something you'll never understand. As Damien walked out into the rain, he felt lighter than he had in years. He dialed the hospital. Nurse Beatrice, it's Damien. I'm coming to see my sons. Tell them. Tell them their dad is coming home. 5 years later, the sun rose over the Hamptons, casting a golden hue across the manicured lawns of the Blackwood estate. It was a Saturday, which meant the usual silence of the expansive property was broken by the sound of thundering footsteps and high-pitched laughter. In the kitchen, a space usually reserved for quiet espresso sipping and reading the Wall Street Journal, chaos reigned. Flour dusted the granite countertops like snow. "Dad, Noah is putting chocolate chips in the eggs," Liam shouted, his voice vibrating with the kind of indignant outrage only a 5-year-old could muster. Damien Blackwood, once known as the Iron Wolf of Wall Street for his ruthless acquisitions, merely laughed. He turned from the stove, where he was attempting to flip pancakes, shaped, somewhat unsuccessfully, like dinosaurs. "It's a culinary experiment, Liam," Damien said, catching Noah's hand just before another handful of semi-sweet morsels went into the scramble. "But maybe let's save the chocolate for the pancakes, okay, buddy?" Noah, the quieter of the two, pushed his thick-rimmed glasses up his nose. "Sweet and savory is a valid flavor profile, Dad. Uncle Thomas said so." "Uncle Thomas is your bodyguard, not a Michelin star chef," Damien teased, ruffling Noah's dark, curly hair. Damien looked at them, really looked at them. To the outside world, they were just two energetic, privileged children. But Damien saw the miracle in every movement. He remembered the NICU. He remembered the transparency of their skin, the beep of the monitors that haunted his dreams for a year, the terrifying nights when Noah's oxygen levels dropped and doctors swarmed the incubator. Conrad had called them vegetables. He had called them a bad investment. Now, Liam was a whirlwind of kinetic energy, a natural athlete who dominated his Pee-wee soccer league. Noah was a contemplative genius, already reading at a 3rd-grade level and obsessed with robotics. They were thriving. They were alive. They were his. Not by blood, but by every metric that actually mattered. "All right, breakfast at the table," Damien ordered, plating the dinosaur pancakes. "We have a big day. The museum exhibit opens at noon, and if we're late, we miss the T-Rex feeding simulation." "Yes," Liam pumped his fist. "I'm gonna roar louder than him." While the Blackwood household was filled with the warmth of syrup and laughter, the atmosphere in Manhattan was decidedly colder. In the corner office of Apex Dynamics, 40 floors above the city, the air conditioning was set to a chilling 65 degrees. Conrad Sterling sat behind his glass desk, a fortress of solitude that had become increasingly lonely over the last 5 years. The years had not been kind to Conrad. While he was still handsome in a sharp, predatory way, the stress of maintaining his empire was showing. There were deep lines etched around his mouth, and his temples were graying. But the real rot was in the financials. Apex Dynamics was bleeding. He had missed the pivot to AI integration. He had alienated his board of directors. His reputation as a tyrant meant top talent avoided his company like a plague. He was rich, yes, but he was losing relevancy. And for a narcissist like Conrad, Irrelevancy was a fate worse than death. Mr. Sterling. Conrad didn't look up as his assistant, a terrified young man named Peter, entered. I told you, Peter, unless the stock is up 10 points, I don't want to be disturbed. It's not the stock, sir. Well, the PR team thought you should see this. It's trending. Peter placed a tablet on the desk. Conrad scoffed, picking up his crystal tumbler of scotch. It was only 11 a.m. Trending? I don't care about celebrity gossip. It's about Mr. Blackwood, sir. Conrad froze. The name alone was enough to make his stomach turn. Damien Blackwood, the man who had humiliated him, the man who had inexplicably adopted the burdens Conrad had discarded, and then proceeded to become even more successful. Conrad looked at the screen. It was a feature article in the New York Times Magazine. The headline was bold and imposing. The Quiet King, How Damien Blackwood Built a New Empire on Fatherhood. The photo accompanying the article was a candid shot, high resolution, and undeniably charming. It showed Damien in Central Park, kneeling in the grass to tie the shoelace of a young boy, while another boy sat on his shoulders, pointing excitedly at a kite. The lighting was perfect. Damien looked happy, human, approachable. But Conrad didn't look at Damien. His eyes locked onto the children. He zoomed in. His breath hitched in his throat. He saw the jawline. It was his jawline. He saw the eyes. Dark, piercing, intelligent. They were Natalie's eyes, but the stare was all Conrad. They aren't. Sick, Conrad whispered. The glass in his hand trembled, the ice clinking softly. He read the article, his eyes devouring the text. Liam and Noah, now 5, are a testament to Blackwood's dedication. Despite a rocky start and a prognosis that scared away their biological family, the twins have made a full recovery. Liam is a budding athlete, and Noah has been accepted into the gifted program at Dalton. Gifted! Conrad hissed the word. Athlete! The narrative in his head shifted violently. 5 years ago, the doctors had spoken of brain bleeds and cerebral palsy. They had spoken of lifelong dependency. Conrad had made a business decision to cut his losses. He had liquidated a failing asset. But he had been lied to. That was the only explanation his ego would accept. Damien hadn't adopted charity cases. He had stolen assets. He had stolen genetic potential. He tricked me, Conrad said, his voice rising from a whisper to a growl. He stood up, pacing the length of the office. He knew they would be perfect. He wanted my sons because he couldn't have his own. He wanted my legacy. Conrad looked at his reflection in the window. He saw a man with no heir, a man whose company was faltering, a man who was alone. And then he looked back at the tablet. He saw 2 healthy, handsome boys who carried his DNA. They were the solution. They were the reboot his image needed, the redemption of the grieving father. It would play perfectly in the press. He slammed his hand down on the intercom button. Get me Gareth, now. 10 minutes later, his lead attorney, Mr. Gareth, was on the speakerphone. Sir, I strongly advise against this. Gareth's voice was weary. You signed a closed adoption agreement. You surrendered parental rights. You cited emotional distress and inability to care. The courts don't look kindly on take-backsies after 5 years. I was coerced, Conrad shouted at the speakerphone, veins bulging in his neck. I was grieving. My wife had just died. Damien Blackwood took advantage of my vulnerable state. He committed fraud by misrepresenting the medical condition of the children. Proving fraud is difficult, Mr. Sterling. The medical records from that night were dire. Blackwood took a gamble, and it paid off. That's not fraud. That's luck. I don't care what you call it. Conrad grabbed a heavy glass paperweight and hurled it across the room. It shattered a framed award on the opposite wall. "Those are my sons. They are sterlings. They belong to me. Look at them. They are prodigies. I will not let my enemy raise my heirs." There was a silence on the line. "If we do this," Gareth said slowly, "it will be a war. Blackwood has resources. He will fight dirty." "Good." Conrad smiled, a cold, shark-like expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I miss a good fight. Draft the papers, Gareth. I want full custody. I want a name change. And I want a press conference scheduled for Monday morning. We're going to paint Damien as a kidnapper." Back in the limousine, heading toward the Museum of Natural History, Damien felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. The hair on the back of his arm stood up. "Dad, you okay?" Liam asked, looking up from his tablet. "You stopped smiling." Damien blinked, shaking off the feeling. He looked at his son, the exact shape of Natalie's nose, the kindness in his expression. He reached over and squeezed Liam's shoulder, perhaps a little too tightly. "I'm fine, Leo," Damien lied smoothly. "Just thinking about work." "Boring," Liam declared, turning back to his game. "Yeah," Damien whispered, looking out the window at the grey skyline of New York City. Boring. But deep down, his instincts, the same instincts that had saved him from a dozen hostile takeovers, were screaming. The silence from the Sterling camp had lasted 5 years. It had been too quiet. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to Thomas, who was driving the follow car. "Upgrade security at the estate. Level 4. And get me a meeting with Sarah regarding the adoption seals. I have a bad feeling the ghost is about to walk through the wall." Damien looked at Noah, who was asleep against the window, and Liam, who was humming a made-up song. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that hospital 5 years ago, terrified and alone. He was a father now, and for his sons, he wouldn't just fight a billionaire. He would burn the entire city to the ground if he had to. The war was coming, and Conrad Sterling had no idea what he had just unleashed. The summons didn't arrive in an envelope. It arrived as a headline. Damien was in the middle of a board meeting at Ironclad Holdings when his phone began to vibrate incessantly against the mahogany table. It was Thomas, his head of security. Damien silenced it. But then the boardroom television, usually set to a silent news ticker, flashed a breaking news banner that made the blood freeze in his veins. "Billionaire versus billionaire. Conrad Sterling sues for custody of stolen sons." The room went silent. 12 pairs of eyes turned to Damien. Damien stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket with a hand that felt like it belonged to a statue. "Meeting adjourned," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. He walked out, ignoring the stunned whispers, and marched straight into his office, where Thomas was already waiting, looking grim. "He filed this morning," Thomas said, handing Damien a thick stack of legal documents. "He's claiming fraud, coercion, and temporary insanity due to grief. He's petitioning for immediate custody and a restraining order against you." Damien flipped through the pages. The lies were breathtaking. Conrad claimed Damien had preyed upon a grieving father and hidden the medical viability of the children. "He doesn't want them, Thomas," Damien said, tossing the papers onto his desk. "He wants the photo op. He saw the article. He saw they aren't vegetables, as he called them. Now he wants his heirs back." "The press is camped outside the estate," Thomas warned. "Liam and Noah are inside with the nanny. They're scared, sir. They saw the helicopters." Damien's face darkened. "Get the car." The weeks that followed were a siege. Conrad Sterling, a man who hadn't visited his wife's grave in 5 years, suddenly became the face of fatherly anguish. He went on talk shows, wearing somber colors, squeezing out tears on cue. "I was out of my mind with grief," Conrad told a sympathetic news anchor, his voice cracking. And my former friend, he took advantage of that. He took my boys. I just want to hold them. I just want to be a father. The public, fickle as ever, began to sway. They saw a biological father fighting for his flesh and blood against a cold corporate rival. Protesters began to gather outside Damien's gates, holding signs that read, "Give the father his sons." Inside the house, the atmosphere was tense. Liam and Noah, now 5 and sharp as tacks, knew something was wrong. "Is the bad man coming?" Noah asked one night, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Damien sat on the edge of Noah's bed, his heart breaking. "No one is taking you anywhere, Noah. I promise. I am your dad. Nothing changes that." "But he says he's our dad on TV," Liam whispered, looking angry. "He looks mean." "Biology is just science, boys," Damien said fiercely. "Being a father is a promise, and I don't break promises." The custody hearing was set for the High Court of New York. Because of the high profile, the magistrate, a stern woman named Justice Reynolds, allowed cameras in the courtroom. It was the trial of the decade. Conrad arrived with an entourage of lawyers, looking sleek and confident. He waved to the cameras, playing the victim perfectly. Damien arrived alone, stone-faced, refusing to engage with the circus. The first 2 days were a bloodbath. Conrad's lawyer, a vicious man named Mr. Pike, painted Damien as a manipulative bachelor who had stolen the children to spite a business rival. They brought up old business deals, trying to prove Damien had a vendetta. Then Conrad took the stand. He sat in the witness box, looking humble. "Mr. Sterling," Pike asked softly, "tell the court about the night your wife died." Conrad took a deep breath, looking directly at the camera. "It was the worst night of my life. I was at the hospital, praying. When she died, I broke. I couldn't think. And Damien, he was there. He told me the boys were brain dead. He told me they would never walk or talk. He handed me papers and told me it was for their medical care. I didn't know I was signing them away. I loved Natalie. I loved those unborn boys more than my own life." A hush fell over the courtroom. People were crying in the gallery. It was a perfect performance. Damien's lawyer, a sharp woman named Sarah, stood up. "Mr. Sterling, you claim you loved your wife and children?" "More than anything," Conrad said, dabbing his eyes. "And you claim you were at the hospital, praying?" "Yes." "And you claim you didn't know the medical status of the twins?" "I was told they were hopeless," Conrad insisted. Sarah nodded. She walked back to her table and looked at Damien. Damien gave a single sharp nod. "Your Honor," Sarah said, turning to Justice Reynolds, "we would like to submit a piece of evidence, Exhibit C." "Objection," Mr. Pike stood up. "We haven't seen this." "It was submitted to discovery this morning, Counselor," Sarah said calmly. "It is a digital audio file." The magistrate nodded. "Play it." The courtroom fell silent. A static hiss filled the air. Then a voice cut through the speakers. It was Conrad's voice, but it wasn't the sad, grieving tone he used in court. It was cold, arrogant, and drunk. "She died because she was weak, Damien. And it sounds like the children are broken too. I have an empire to run. I can't be changing diapers for vegetables. Now get out of my sight." The color drained from Conrad's face. He stood up in the witness box. That's a deep fake. That's AI." But the recording continued. It shifted to another clip, the sound of a phone call. "Damien, you want to take my burdens? You want to raise 2 cripples? You want to spend your fortune on medical bills? They are just a reminder of a bad investment." The gallery gasped. The sound of pure, unfiltered malice echoed off the wood-panelled walls. The grieving father mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Sarah stopped the recording. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice cutting like a knife. "Did you or did you not refer to your newborn sons as a bad investment?" I was in shock," Conrad stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "I was drunk. It was grief." "Let's play the 911 call," Sarah suggested mercilessly. "The one where your wife begged you to come home because she was bleeding, and you told her she was embarrassing you." "No," Conrad shouted, slamming his hand on the railing. "You can't play that. That's private." "It proves your character, Mr. Sterling," Justice Reynolds said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Overruled. Play it." The sound of Natalie's dying pleas filled the room, her weak voice begging for her husband, and Conrad's voice, dismissive and cruel, hanging up on her. When the tape ended, the silence in the room was heavier than lead. Conrad looked around. The sympathetic faces in the gallery had turned to looks of utter revulsion. Even his own lawyer looked sick. Damien stood up. He wasn't supposed to, but he walked toward the witness stand. The bailiff didn't stop him. "You didn't want them because they were weak," Damien said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "You threw them away like trash, and now that I healed them, now that I loved them into the strong young men they are, you want to steal the credit? You aren't a father, Conrad. You're a shareholder, and you just sold your stock." Conrad's face twisted into a snarl. The facade broke completely. "I made them!" he screamed, lunging against the witness box railing. "My DNA, my blood, they belong to me. I am Apex Dynamics. I get what I want." "Order!" Justice Reynolds banged her gavel, but Conrad was unraveling. "You think you can take them?" Conrad pointed a shaking finger at Damien. "I'll bury you. I'll bankrupt you. Mr. Sterling, sit down, or I will hold you in contempt," the magistrate roared. Conrad collapsed back into the chair, breathing heavily. He looked at the cameras. He realized in that moment that the live feed had broadcast his meltdown to the entire world. The stock of Apex Dynamics was likely free-falling at that very second. The verdict was delivered 2 hours later. It was swift and brutal. Justice Reynolds looked at Conrad with open disdain. "Mr. Sterling, not only do I dismiss your petition for custody with prejudice, meaning you can never file again, but I am also recommending the district attorney look into charges of criminal negligence regarding the death of Natalie Sterling." Conrad slumped forward, his head hitting the wood. "Furthermore," the magistrate continued, "I am granting Mr. Blackwood a permanent restraining order. If you come within 500 feet of Liam or Noah Blackwood, you will go to prison." The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot ending Conrad's life. Damien walked out of the courthouse. The press was still there, but the mood had changed. They were silent, respectful. They parted like the Red Sea. Damien walked to his car, where Thomas was waiting. He opened the door and slid in. Liam and Noah were waiting in the back seat, their faces pressed against the window. "Did you win, Dad?" Liam asked, his voice small. Damien pulled them both into a crushing hug. He buried his face in their necks, smelling the innocence he had fought the devil to protect. "Yeah, buddy," Damien choked out, tears finally falling. "We won. He's never coming back." The real wealth 6 months later. The fall leaves were turning gold in Central Park. Damien walked along the path, holding hands with the boys. They were laughing, kicking through the piles of leaves. Conrad Sterling was currently awaiting trial. Apex Dynamics had filed for bankruptcy, its assets liquidated. The penthouse where Natalie had died was sold to pay legal fees. The billionaire genius was now a cautionary tale, a man alone in a cell, left with nothing but his ego. Damien stopped at a bench. It was a memorial bench. The plaque read, "In memory of Natalie." She loved the stories. "Is this Mummy's bench?" Noah asked, tracing the letters. "Yes," Damien said. "She would have loved watching you play soccer, Noah. And she would have loved your drawings, Liam." "Do you think she knows you're our dad?" Liam asked, looking up with big, serious eyes. Damien looked at the sky, where the clouds were breaking to let the sun through. He thought about that rainy night, the blood on his hands, the promise he whispered to a dying woman. "I think she knows," Damien said softly. "I think she picked me." "Can we get ice cream?" Liam asked, the solemn moment passing as quickly as it came, replaced by the urgent needs of a 5-year-old. "2 scoops," Damien agreed. As they walked away, a trio of silhouettes against the golden sun, Damien Blackwood realized he was the richest man in the world. Not because of ironclad holdings, or his bank accounts, or his real estate. He was rich because, when his sons had nightmares, they called his name. He was rich because he had turned a tragedy into a triumph. He was rich because he had proven that while blood might make you related, only love makes you a family. And as for the enemy who tried to destroy them, he was just a ghost story, a bad dream that woke them up, only to make the morning light seem that much brighter. What a ride. We just witnessed the ultimate downfall of a man who valued money over life, and the rise of a hero who proved that being a father is about showing up, not just sharing DNA. Conrad Sterling thought he could buy his way out of anything, even the consequences of his own cruelty. But he forgot the one rule of the universe. The truth always has a way of coming out, usually when the cameras are rolling. Damien didn't just save those boys. He saved Natalie's memory. It's a powerful reminder to hold our loved ones close and never let ambition blind us to what truly matters. If this story moved you, or if you were cheering when Conrad finally got what he deserved in that courtroom, please hit that like button. It helps us create more stories like this. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a good drama, and make sure you are subscribed with notifications on so you never miss the next episode. What do you think? Should Conrad have gone to jail for longer? Let me know in the comments below.